and moving on to Dr. Dalia Bassiouny. And as I said, right now she's not a doctor, she's not the academic, but she is the playwright and the director and the activist who was day and night in the square. We used to have long chats in the square with tear gas filling the air, and it was amazing. Right now it looks really amazing.
I want to thank you for this invitation, and I want to tell you it's really humbling to be back in the department where I graduated many years ago. I will not reveal the number. To see so many of my professors and my colleagues and the new students, it's a really warm room. I was in Iraq 2 days ago, and I have to tell you it was not like that at all. I want to talk about the work I've presented, but I also want to frame it in the context of the tension between being an artist and being a civilian, and what comes first in times of crisis and the romantic tear gas bomb and these kinds of situations. As the revolution was starting, I was working on a performance, a play that I wrote. It was a three-women performance, 3 monologues, called it Solitaire, because each of them had a connection with Solitaire. And the revolution started and everything stopped, and we really could not go back to the project as it was because we were different, and we could not just pretend that nothing happened. Luckily or unluckily, I had a commitment to perform part of this performance in Iraq in April. So somehow we had to go back to that production, but something was major that was happening in the square and to us. And there were so many stories. I was hearing so many stories, and I knew from my work in oral history in the States and other places that a lot of these stories will be forgotten or dissipate or disappear because there are so many more stories that are replacing them. So as we were in the square, I was asking people to respond to questions or to share some of their stories. People were busy with being the activists they were. We were trying to activate the revolution in other parts. It's not inside the square. So I would have my camera with me. When people tell me a story, I would just tape it and ask for permission to transcribe it. And we presented as a group first performance of Hawadith Tahrir stories in February 23rd, just a few days after depositing of the ex-president. And it was a very moving performance because almost everybody who performed was telling their story, or for instance, Sahar Elmougy gave us a story, but another revolutionary was able to read that story. People who were in the square only 10 days before were so touched by that performance because for them it reminded them, why did they go? It wasn't like months or years after, it was just 10 or 11 days. But somehow to relive it through the narrative, the visceral memories of the people who were there was a very powerful act of remembering, of a verbatim theater. Verbatim is word for word, so these were testimonies of revolutionaries that we've collected. We were also honoring the names of the martyrs. At the time, we only knew the names of 192 people, and we just said the name and a drum beat for everyone that we were able to document the name of. And it was a ritual performance, so as a community, people who were on stage and people who were with it, Hanegar had not opened yet, so we were doing it in front of Hanegar, which felt like the square, the rubble, the piles of sand. It was still a work, like the ground. Now it's a lovely garden, but it wasn't at the moment. And somehow that powerful act was a beautiful way to commemorate what was still happening. But it was interesting to be doing a performance about the revolution and have the revolution disrupt your performance about the revolution. That day, some of the people who were supposed to be in the performance, and in addition to some of the audience members, could not come because there was a fire in the Ministry of Interior. And a few weeks later, we were doing another performance. There was another fire in the Ministry of Interior. I stopped doing that performance because I'm worried about the Ministry of Interior. But somehow that performance was like somehow connected to all the dramatics that was happening around us at the time. So one day we were presenting in Man's Theater, and some of you might know that we had this disaster in 2005 where we lost a lot of theater people because they burned in a theater where they could not escape. So the theater community does not allow us to use open flame incense, anything that could burn, instead of updating their work. I mean, they still smoke on stage because they can, but as a performance we could not do the same ritual, so I changed the performance to have a soundscape, create the ritual through a chorus. And the next day I could not have my chorus because of the other fire, so the performance had to change to adapt to the situation. I was involved in other performances as well, and my motto is, if there is bloodshed, I'm not performing. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere. And I was acting in a performance. I'm not an actor, but people who were doing Oscar was saying they were there. If you know that performance, wanted me to help with it. And there is violence around. And even if you dedicate your performance to the martyrs or to the revolution, if somebody is being killed 2 or 3 streets away from you, it's the role of art is put in a different context for me. And as an artist, this is my love, my passion, my work, but I am a human being and a citizen first, and I would say, if somebody is being killed right now, it's not possible for me to go on stage and do a play. So that had been our negotiation and our trouble somehow, because when we were doing Solitaire, the following piece I did, which is part of this 3-woman monologue, we had to stop the performances and rehearse when we can and go and demonstrate when we couldn't. Another performance that I wrote later called Sihr al-Borolus, Magic of Borolus, which is kind of a reworking of the Crucible or the Salem witch trials, was stopped twice because we were rehearsing in November a year ago, and Mohamed happened, and luckily most of my cast is involved in the revolution, so none of us had the energy, but also the voice or the focus. We were on the front lines dealing with what Egyptians had to deal with, and we had to postpone that performance and push it later. I will tell you a little bit about the work I had with the three-woman play that became eventually just one-woman play to present in Iraq and other places. That story was about an Arab-American woman who was coming to an awareness of her political identity. 9/11 happened as she is in New York, and then she is somehow becoming more of an active person in demonstrating against the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the bombings in Gaza, and so on and so forth. So somehow that was a perfect pretext to add a section about the revolution. So the first part of the play was written in 2009, but when we were ready to perform it, we could not ignore the biggest demonstrations in the century, as it were. So people would not realize that these are 2 sections of a play that were put together later. That performance changes wherever we perform it. We were lucky to be invited to perform it in a few places. In Zimbabwe, I was invited to the Protest Arts Festival. Under Mugabe, 32-year dictatorship, they have a Protest Arts Festival, and they found us online and they wanted me to do a solitaire and give a keynote speech. And for them, they think of North Africans as pious people who are religious, who do not rebel. So to have a woman coming to tell them, this is what we did, and this is a piece of the revolution, documenting it visually and in performance dramatically as well, was such an interesting perspective. It was also interesting for me to present a performance in a thatched roof hut, in a hut. Fascinating, I had to change the performance for a very different dynamic performance. I toured with that play in a few countries, in Germany, in a few cities in the States. I was in Iraq, in Morocco with it. I'm going to Abu Dhabi and again to New York. So the show is moving a lot, but in each performance, even if it's the same city, somehow it changes meaning. So when I was presenting it just a couple of days before the 10th anniversary of 9/11, most people focused on, it's not just Americans that suffered for 9/11. Arabs suffered too. Especially when I had younger audiences who were, I don't think, 4th grade or 5th grade when 9/11 happened. So for them it was this personal wound that suddenly they are seeing their repercussions in other works and in other parts of the world, but also for Arab Americans who are inside the American society, who are part of the fabric of society, yet are still seen as the face of the enemy. And what does that mean to them? I want to talk about something that is not particularly pertinent to my work, but to a lot of the work I see after the revolution. I am so glad that so many people found a voice or gained a stronger voice. There's a plethora of expression. Many companies, I was in the committee for a new festival called Afat, Mahragan Afat al-Masrahi. We had 240 applications of plays. Most of them are really bad plays, I would not recommend, but the problem is a lot of them claim to be plays about the revolution without the awareness. So we've had a number of plays using the revolution as their pretext. Some of them are not really seen in the way I would like people to be aware of. I am part of a group who we created a critics group called نقاد الثورة مستمرة. حركة نقاد الثورة مستمرة, the critics of the continued revolution, because we believe if people have a stronger or clearer awareness of what's going on the cognitive and the cultural level, if we can topple that regime, we can really topple the regime that has not changed. So I just wanted to mention there are so many plays that go under the disguise of مسرحية عن الثورة, and you go and watch it and they choose the best actor or the comedian to play the dictator, unaware that you're creating an affinity with that person, so the audience like him because he's funny and he's the cool guy and he knows how to act, and they think they're doing a play to support the revolution. There's so many of these performances that are surrounding me, unfortunately, at this moment in time, and I just want to bring this to the table as part of the conversation we'll have later. Thank you.
Dalia Bassiouny for narrating your experiences